Hi, I'm Mike Levine. My main job is I'm the editor of Electronic Musician magazine, and I'm also a longtime musician and composer. I've done music for commercials and some TV stuff.
We last saw each other 2 years
Yeah,
ago.
at Mogfest.
And we last spoke maybe a year and a half. So what's happened since
The
then?
biggest thing for me is I became the editor of Electronic Musician. I got called to play on a TV show on Good Morning America with a country artist about a year ago. They needed a dobro player, and I played the dobro. And the composing work that I've been doing has been mostly a lot of stuff for stock music. I do acoustic-y, rootsy kind of stuff. I play a lot of stringed instruments, guitar and pedal steel and dobro and a little bit of banjo, learning the fiddle, which is not easy. And then I'm playing a couple of bands, and one's like an acoustic trio, and the other one's like a rock band where I'm playing guitar. So
What always interests me is people who have musical background that is quite different from the main work.
the name is a little misleading of the magazine because really, although we do focus a lot on synthesizers and, electronic music, quote unquote, our magazine for people who, and mainly who record at home. It isn't as much of a paradox as it sounds like. I'm really into electronic stuff too. I did an album a couple years ago where I tried to mix acoustic and electronics elements together.
Tell us more about it. Did you record this at home?
Yes, I
then?
recorded it at home. It was mostly, leaning to the acoustic side, but I would do stuff like throw a synth solo into a bluegrass song or just do some unusual stuff. There's a lot of great artists doing world music with electronic flavorings to it.
Yeah, you brought to mind an artist in Spain I knew about through buying his CD while I was in Spain, and an electronic bagpipe player.
Oh, wow.
This guy was quite ingenious to try and tap into the more mainstream pop world and yet preserve some of the
Right.
artistry from the more folksy, traditional environment.
Yeah, I guess the electronic part was more for tone and stuff because
Yeah.
you certainly don't need any more volume with a bagpipe.
Certainly not.
It's not about the bathroom.
Electronic vacuum cleaner.
Yeah, right, there you go.
That could be an interesting companion to the theremin.
Yeah. Go ahead. Feel free to take it up if you want. I'm not a keyboard player. I mean, I mess around a little, but I had to go through sort of contortions for that, using MIDI and slowing it down, way down, to play stuff in and quantizing or whatever. But I'm actually about to finally get a good MIDI guitar set up. Or it's a Roland pickup and an Axon MIDI converter box, so I'll be able to basically just plug in, get MIDI out from my guitar right into the computer. It takes the string, vibrations and outputs it on this 13-pin jack.
It's pretty accurate.
Well, so I've heard, I used to have a MIDI guitar set up way back. I finally just stopped using it because in the past, when I was doing commercials and whatever, I'd call in a musician or singer or whatever, and they just never do it the way I wanted to hear it,
So you're fussy.
I'm fussy. I'm probably too fussy, but especially when it's your own material, you really want it exactly the way you hear it in your head. There's definitely something to be said for the interaction of musicians. There's also something to be said for completely controlling the vision. So it's obviously based around my computer, which is a Mac Pro. Because of my job, I kind of have to be familiar with a bunch of different software programs. These days, lately, my main sequencer is Logic, but I also have been using a Propeller Head Record program, which works with Reason, which is really cool. And I use Pro Tools sometimes, Digital Performer sometimes, so it really kind of depends on what I'm trying to do, because each program has its strengths.
Do you care to share some of these?
Logic is great for me for composing because they have all these loops that are just right there at your fingertips. Point being, it's very easy for setting instruments up and getting things going, and I like its audio editing a lot. My favorite audio editor is Pro Tools. I mixed my whole album in Pro Tools, that first album.
Yeah, is the podcast your baby?
Well, it was my idea. People at the magazine said we need to get some audio content going on. I do phone interviews with people, and we have the main segment, which is about 15 minutes, and I have an interview segment with one of the EM editors about new gear, usually software and sound libraries he's dealing with. So I used to do 2 a month. I don't know how I did that. There's so much editing. You have to go in and take out the breaths, but I've discovered that some people breathe really loud when they're talking, and it sounds, you don't notice it when you're talking. When you hear it on recording, it's like, whoa, man. Well, we've had some big engineers Chris Lord-Alge, we had Phil Ramone. We also get musicians. I just did an interview with Todd Rundgren, a guy from Soul Live. Well, the Chris Lord-Alge interview was really interesting. He's a great mix engineer, and he was offering a lot of tips, an area that at least I've found to be probably the hardest part of production. I really am impressed with these mix engineers who can go in and, spend a few hours on a song and it sounds great. For me, it's always a big process and a lot of going back and remixing, listening in my car and listening here and listening there.
And how do you decide that it's finally great?
Well, it needs to be balanced. You need to be able to hear all the elements. One area of production where if I had the bucks to do it, would love to just bring in an engineer to help me with is the mixing side.
So do you master it yourself?
Well, sometimes, depends what I'm doing. If it's a small project, yes. I've actually brought the last couple of major projects that I've done to a mastering engineer, a guy named Rich Tizzoli. They can enhance it. They can also fix problems. There's a very well-known mastering engineer named Greg Calby. I know him, and we did an interview with him for Electronic Musician. I went to his studio, basically sat in on a mastering session and watched everything he did. I mean, it just has more of a sheen.
So you mentioned something about fixing things?
Even do some stuff with isolating elements within the stereo mix, mid-side techniques. There's a lot of stuff they can do, really.
You talked about it being your main job these
Yes,
days,
it is.
your main preoccupation.
It is.
How do you move the magazine?
It's a challenging time for magazines in general. Magazines are putting a lot of focus on putting content on their websites, and we're doing that as well. So now we have two components, which is part of the reason I'm so busy. We have the website and we have the magazine, and I can only see them becoming more and more prominent as the technology advances and you can do even more in your own space. And home studios have definitely impacted the development of music. I mean, there'll still always be a place for a good studio. They have nice mics and you can record beautiful sounding acoustic instruments and all that. But I do think it's a tough time for commercial studios. It has been for a while. And only the really big, strong ones are surviving, it seems like. The Hit Factory went out of business not too long ago in New York. And I mean, that was a major place. So technology is definitely driving music in a lot of ways, I think. A lot of stuff in R&B where all the vocals are getting auto-tuned and all, that's like a whole sound. Home studios, though, are getting better and everything's getting cheaper and computers are getting more powerful and God only knows what we'll be able to do in 10 or 15 years. And video is getting more incorporated into stuff and, it's crazy. It's great. People are working remotely, from one country with someone in another part of the country, either sending files, by FTP or they're actually working in real time.
It's interesting you brought that up about home studios and commercial studios not quite being at competition with each other because it's not quite the same animal. 25 years ago, if you needed to record a voiceover, you had to go into a studio. There was home recording, way back, reel-to-reel 4-track. It was very crude compared to what you can do now. There's a lot of voiceover artists who have their own setups at home. They just FTP their stuff to their clients. A lot of business has been lost because of this, But then again, other business has been gained, I guess. The matrix of it all, for want of a better word,
Yeah.
makes it, I think, an ever-evolving kind of scene.
I agree with that to a point, but it's also can be a bad thing, and it happens now that they can find somebody who will work for virtually nothing. And so people who were making money as composers are not anymore. I don't think that's going to encourage quality in the long run. Most of the work I used to do, all the commercials and stuff, everything was done in New York through the Musicians Union, and you got residuals, and it was really a much better setup. Now, it's a rare time that you end up on a commercial that is through the union, and I think that's definitely a bad thing for musicians, at least.
So it's a trying time for everybody.
Yeah, anywhere that has to do with digital media, everything is changing, and we're kind of like right in the middle. There's a lot of opportunities too on the plus side, but there's a lot of loss of income. One thing that has changed is this whole licensing phenomenon that's happened in the last few years, where for TV shows, even for movie soundtracks, they are going around finding music online. Unknown bands are getting, and artists are getting their music used in big situations. I think people just need to get as good as you can on your instrument and on your software and your studio, and do remember that really need at least some grounding in the fundamentals of audio and recording to be able to really do a good job. I think that's important, and understand mic placement and phase and all those kinds of things that can trip you up when you're trying to get a good sounding recording.
Knowing the fundamentals of recording and engineering is as important as having fundamental musical
Absolutely.
knowledge.
And you can learn almost anything online these days. You have to be careful that you're getting it from a good source. You know, if you can get in a program or something, you know, you can afford it and you have the time for it, it'd probably be a helpful thing too. Or just work with someone who knows what they're doing.
Thanks for your time.